Were the good old days really all that good? We'll explore Anton LaVey's essay on the topic. Spoiler, the answer is no. And a related college commencement speech from 2024 on the irrationality of claiming collective victim status, paying homage to George Carlin.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Those of you who are Satanists know that there are recurring themes in Satanism on self-responsibility that comes as part of the package with being your own god. We see, for example, in the 9 Satanic Statements, Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. Psychic vampires being those reprehensible people in life who psychologically feed off of other people in a parasitic way. In the Satanic Rules of the Earth, which we covered in depth in Satansplain episode number 60, we see items like, do not tell your troubles to others unless you are sure they want to hear them, and also, do not give opinions or advice unless you are asked, and so on. And no, using social media is not a violation of the latter, because if you post something in public with a comments section below it, you are inviting people to give their opinions. But hopefully you grasp the overall idea here. Sure, there are problems in this world, and ignoring or running away from them is not always the best thing to do. It's up to the individual Satanist to decide what battles are worth fighting and how. But for the most part, there are a lot of stupid things in this world that you don't actually have to subject yourself to. I see a lot of collectivism these days, namely in the form of a political far left and political far right. I see leftists who think they're oppressed when they're simply not. And I see equally annoying and equally whiny people on the far right who think that the olden days were this great utopia and that if we just all follow a certain set of guidelines, everything will be okay again. But I believe what George Carlin said in both of these cases when he said, if you think there's a solution, you're part of the problem. As Satanists, we want to at least try to maximize the pleasure we have in this life, because it's the only life we have. And I think part of that includes being happy to be alive, and happy to have the ability to shape our lives as we see fit. Recently, I found a speech that was delivered at a college commencement this year. It's a speech titled, To the Class of 2024, You Are All Diseased. And for those wondering, yes, that title, You Are All Diseased, is taken from the 1999 HBO special and comedy album from comedian George Carlin. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the second half of the show, so I'm going to read that later as it relates to some of the ideas I just pointed out. But before I do that, I'd like to read this essay from Anton LaVey. This is from his compilation essay book, Satan Speaks, which was released posthumously in 1998. And this essay is about the so-called good old days. Here it is. The Good Old Days, a Devil's Advocacy by Anton LaVey. Having been a rebellious youth, I can attest that the quote-unquote good old days were not so good. First off, conformity, right or wrong, was king. Sure, we can talk about the parameters of conformity in today's world and somehow equalize them with those of the past. It's easy to argue that one conforms just as much as today, but to different standards. But I believe there is more room for individual out-of-the-closet nonconformity today than ever before, if the opportunity is taken. Things we now take for granted were once so tabooed as to be unthinkable. In the good old days, if you didn't believe in God, you at least paid lip service to a benign supreme being. Oddly enough, the devil did not constitute a threat and was able to be utilized in all manner of popular culture. He could appear in everything from food products to sports team mascots without consternation. As long as one believed in God, it was perfectly all right to entertain Satan for fun. If you were actually serious about metaphysical pursuits, you ran the risk of being pointed out as a strange cultist at best or devil worshipper at worst. The Rosicrucians were about as dark as you could get. Institutions such as the military had no provision for alternative offbeat religions. If you weren't of a Christian denomination, you must therefore be Jewish, a separate kind of human being, tolerated at best. At least Jews could change their names and live like Christians, and nobody would be the wiser. Not so with people of color. They were stuck with their stigma. It is inconceivable today what real racism was like in the good old days. Romantics like to talk of the slower pacing of yesterday. In many ways, it wasn't so good. If you were traveling abroad and got homesick, you couldn't just jump on a jet and be back in your own bed in a few hours. Mail was slow, and long-distance telephone was a costly luxury. Well-made products were so well-made that it took 4 strong men to move an item that could be now single-handedly lifted into a van. Yes, a van. Respectable folk didn't drive such vehicles for personal use. Backbreaking labor accompanied tasks that are now effortless. Driving a car was a great risk. Tires blew out, presumably efficient brakes failed. A slight nudge from a car in the next parking space was good for a cracked grille, dented fender, or locked bumpers. Radiators overheated, and most vehicles, if subjected to today's driving conditions, would be stalled by the side of the road. Clothing was of fine material and heavy, uncomfortable, hot, scratchy, and hard to maintain. Creases were where they should have been and kept that way, even if it meant not sitting down. Dress codes were rigorous. I could not buy a black shirt anywhere and had to have them tailor-made. Beards of any sort were only worn by psychologists, stage magicians, old Marines, and Santa Claus. Adornments like earrings on a man were unknown. No respectable man had tattoos, and if a woman didn't wear a corset or a girdle, she was considered a slut. Men's hair could be worn longer on the top if it was white wool on the sides and back, never long like a girl's. Schools had truant officers and were run more strictly than prisons are now. There was no place for an unregimented child, no matter how brilliant. Today, a person can enjoy heavy metal and still listen to classical music. Yesterday, a kid was an icky or long hair if you preferred classical. Team sports were mandatory if you opted for peer acceptance. I wonder how many gun-toting types got their start, as I did, protecting themselves from average kids. If you were white, Christian, and liked sports, you were safe from criticism and considered all right. It was truly the era of the WASP. All others were ghettoized for their own peace of mind. And just to pause here, the word ghetto doesn't necessarily mean a poor neighborhood. I know the word has come to mean that in more recent years, but strictly speaking, a ghetto is a neighborhood where everybody's of the same minority group. But anyway, back to the essay. Sex was marvelously prurient, so much so, in some ways, masturbation was a sin and a sickness, and sex before marriage disqualified anyone from public acceptance. Most marriages served a single purpose: to fuck and get fucked. When one considers the elaborate pageantry accompanying contractual vows and for a single simple purpose, the guilts imposed by religion become glaring. Even more depressing to contemplate are the eugenic effects of entire societies born to such unions. It could be likened to the fates of entire nations determined by the regularity of their bowels. Speaking of bowels, next paragraph, commerce in personal hygiene products had not yet become the supreme qualifier, but freedom from constipation had. If you were not regular, you existed within a special purgatory, along with masturbators and eaters of garlic. Cleanliness was next to godliness, except privately. Generally, people smelled pretty strong, and that heavier clothing made them sweat more, and normal activity was strenuous enough to work up a sweat. There are more products available now to reduce the danger of offending, but activity now is less strenuous and less likely to work up a sweat in the first place. Exercise was what one got enough of at work. Women needed no workouts. Housework took care of that. The language was without the sort of profanity expected today, yet you could insult or offend with impunity. Profanity, like sex, was euphemized by terms which may have conveyed the message but left much to be desired as catharsis. What one felt like saying was not what one actually said. Shoot! The notion of understanding was limited to learning, not human relations. Intolerance was rampant because it gave the little man a chance to feel superior. Conformity was so important, it made anyone who was a slightly different fair game to ridicule or insult. There were no special people. It was a much crueler world for the elderly, the handicapped, and children. Hypocrisy was everywhere because self-righteousness was easily maintained. Though standards in the arts were higher, respect was universal to question titles like reverend. A prominent educator covered a lot of undeserved ground. Any college man was prestigious enough to ensure respect, and armchair generals always had their share of wide-eyed disciples. Wartime exploits were every man's claim to fame. Woe unto the fellow who had no buddy-time experiences to relate. You were expected to listen to an ex-serviceman's tales. Now one can walk away with a clear conscience. The guy on the next bar stool has no captive audience. Con artists and posers always had an audience because everyone was more polite and well-mannered and trusting to a fault. If you locked your door, you were either some kind of paranoid crackpot or else had something to hide. Because there were no collectibles, nothing was worth hiding or locking up. Collectibles were thought of as junk to be thrown out. A car over 5 years was a jalopy and not to be taken seriously, even though it may have been a custom Packard or Stutz. Older cars wound up appreciated by high school youths as canvases upon which to paint inane slogans. Books were treated as friends by scholars, but even scholars mistreated their friends miserably, using bacon for bookmarks. Magazines were handled like fish wrapping. Everyone was heavy-handed and heavy-footed. The exceptions were the artistic types considered prissy and effeminate. If you weren't artistic and wanted to be more than a churl, a man in the street, you had better prepared to physically defend your sensibilities. Human interaction was more visceral. Personal injury suits didn't yet abound. And one had to occasionally prove that he was not indeed a sissy. A kid could get beaten up for reading Plato or carrying a violin case, well, unless the case had a machine gun inside. The word gay meant happy and carefree. If you were a homosexual, well, you were considered a pansy, a queer, a fruit, or all-round pervert. Again, with normal sex seeming prurient, hidden homosexuality was even more so. And the hypocrisy. The choir masters, scout masters, sport coaches, camp directors, gym teachers, and priests, all above and beyond reproach. Consequentially, much more actual abuse occurred than today, when alternative sexual preferences don't have to be cloaked in sacrosanct credentials or rah-rah overcompensation. The irony is in the honesty, as blasphemous openness once exhibited by flagrant homosexuals, who were invariably the most intellectually stimulating individuals in every crowd. Theirs was not a group identity, but a personal one, devoid of evangelism and conversion. They didn't care if the world turned gay, or even felt their influence. Now the closeted clerks and gymnasium gropers have healthier and gayer competition, without true deviance. Food preference were not catered to in the good old days. Anything other than American had limited availability. Though maligned, fast food often has taste and becomes the easily obtained meal of choice. Pizza could only be eaten in an ethnic neighborhood, with perhaps only a single such specialty place serving an entire city. Likewise with Asian food or Mexican food. Despite complaints about the death of good music, listeners to the classics never had it so good today. It's all there today if one wants it. An entire symphony may be purchased for a fraction of its 1940 price and heard non-stop on cassette or CD. And to pause here for a moment, obviously digital and streaming formats have made this even easier. The same selection constituted 10 pounds of highly breakable records with a change break every few minutes. An entire collection of favorite films can be owned and viewed by anyone with a VCR. And again, this has gotten even easier in recent years. In the past, only the very privileged could afford private projection facilities. The list grows. Once, if you owned or rode a motorcycle, you were stigmatized as a wild nut. If you used a bicycle or for transportation and were over the age of 14, you were surely an eccentric given to a diet of nuts and berries and barbed in baggy tweeds. If you didn't hunt for sport, you were a milksop sissy. Martial arts were known only as jiu-jitsu and practiced by sneaky yellow bellies. A real man put on the gloves and fought like a real man. If a young man didn't dance, he was a geek who could never expect to get a girl. If a young girl didn't cook or sew, no guy would ever marry her. All kids wanted to play cowboys and Indians, themselves always being the cowboys. A heavy kid was called fatso, kid with glasses, 4 eyes. The ideal build for a boy was like something you'd see floating in a toilet bowl with a face to match. If you were too tall and too thin, you were death warmed over. Girls cursed with aquiline noses, big noses that is, large feet, and over 5'4" were considered ugly and avoided. A girl with glasses was destined to be a librarian and spinster, and presumed to be all dried up. Today's standards for female beauty is exactly what was then considered ungainly and homely. Don't you wish you could go back to those days of yesteryear, where the greatest goal was to become president? Then everyone would love and respect you. And that concludes Anton LaVey's essay on the good old days. I'm sure there are some idiots out there who read some bootlegged version of that essay and didn't pick up on the sarcasm at all, and think, Anton LaVey is advocating sexism and homophobia. You know, like the people who read poetic lines from the Satanic Bible and think Anton LaVey was praising a literal supernatural Satan. Oh well, that's human stupidity for you. Of course, Satansplain listeners are smarter than all that. Let's take a break. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
Handmade, all-natural, botanical perfumes, soaps, and ceremonial incense, sculptures and jewelry to adorn yourself and your other altars. All this and more await you at moonandsunemporium.com. Ritual perfumes and other occult fine art luxuries, created and curated by me, Priestess Sarah Josephine Clark, with tarot readings by Reverend Dr. Dylan Clark. moonandsunemporium.com.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. There are many ways you can listen to Satansplain. You can find episodes of Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, and more places, including the official website, satansplain.com. Please give Satansplain a like or a follow on social media. Look for the Satansplain channel on Facebook, X, or YouTube. For all questions and correspondence, please email me directly, bill@satansplain.com. That is the email address. If you enjoy Satansplain, please consider becoming a paying supporter. Go to satansplain.locals.com. You can join our page on locals.com for free, but you can additionally become a paying supporter. Go to satansplain.locals.com, and thank you as always to all of you who have already donated. I think last episode we didn't get around to sharing a satanic anecdote, so let's do that now. Yes, it's time for a Satanicdote. Cue the Satanicdote theme song.
Satanic anecdotes. Satanicdotes.
This listener has chosen to remain anonymous, but he or she writes, I have a Satanicdote story to share for the next episode. Not sure if it counts as a Satanicdote, but it's a different experience compared to those where Satanists get discovered by other religious people in public. Mine has been interesting. Back in late January this year, I did a PowerPoint presentation about the Church of Satan on ESL levels 6-7. ESL, by the way, is English as a second language. Because my first language is Spanish, I had the opportunity to share my presentation with my classmates for educational purposes and give a piece of advice based on the philosophy. Everything went well. My classmates agreed on my topic. There was no judgment at all, and I had a huge amount of self-confidence. They asked me 2 questions before class ended because my presentation took almost an hour, and I responded with accuracy. However, this is not where the funny part happened. A female classmate of mine, who's from Ukraine, was absent the day of my presentation. She showed up in class the next morning, and our teacher told me to share my 4 books by Anton LaVey, The Satanic Bible, Satanic Ritual, Satanic Witch, and Devil's Notebook, to my classmates due to the lack of time the day before. I notice he's missing Satan Speaks, where I just read an essay from, but anyway. I passed around the books to my classmates, and my Ukrainian classmate, when she saw the word satanic in the covers, her first response was, "Oh wow," with surprise, and an awkward smile. She asked me with a confused face, "Do you really worship the devil?" I know deep down she meant, she said, "Wait, are you a devil worshiper? But you're such a nice person." I then explained to her that the Church of Satan doesn't do those sorts of things the media has portrayed, and that it's only about being the best version of ourselves. She didn't say anything, and she still looked a little confused. I don't remember if my other classmates explained to her a little more for better understanding, but thankfully, again, no judgment at all. How much I wish everyone could be this open-minded on topics like Satanism. I thought it was funny because of my Ukrainian classmate's silly reaction, who thought I was scaring everybody that I'm a devil worshiper. So thanks for that Satanicdote to the anonymous listener. And kudos to this listener, by the way, for doing a presentation on Satanism that went well. As I've said before, as a Satanist, you are under no obligation to educate the masses on our religion. But if you can do it, and do it well, with an audience who can be relatively objective and listen to what you're saying, then that's a great thing, I say. And now, as promised, I'd like to read you the commencement speech titled, "To the Class of 2024, You Are All Diseased." This speech was delivered by Professor Robert Parham, an assistant professor at the University of Virginia's McIntyre School of Commerce. Professor Parham originally published his essay "To the Class of 2024, You Are All Diseased" in the Free Press. But first, if you'd like some more information on the George Carlin special, You Are All Diseased, well, I recommend you check out my website, georgecarlin.net. Yes, that is a complete and comprehensive George Carlin website created and run by yours truly. And You Are All Diseased is probably best remembered for its closing routines, titled Religion and There Is No God. But here is the commencement speech delivered on the 13th of May, 2024 by Professor Robert Parham. If you listened to the beginning of this Satansplain episode, then you should understand the satanic significance of some of the things said here. Here we go. If you are graduating from college this year, I suspect you're not too familiar with George Carlin. So before you come inflamed about the intentionally harsh title of this speech, let me tell you I plagiarized it from George Carlin, who was one of the best American comedians of the last 100 years. His show, You Are All Diseased, is available on YouTube and is so good that I was willing to start by alienating you a bit just to plug it here. You're welcome. It is especially recommended if you're in any kind of altered state of mind. Speaking of states of mind, I am worried about yours. Rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide among people your age in the U.S. are skyrocketing. I myself lost a student to suicide a few years ago, an experience I wish on no one. I'm here to tell you that I think it's partially your professors, fault. We, along with others, have been feeding you a distorted view of the world and your place in it, and I think this has caused a considerable part of the existential angst you all feel. But I'm not just aiming to point fingers. I want to lay a vision of the present and future which I genuinely believe, and yet know many of you don't share. After all, exposing you to unfashionable ideas is a core part of a healthy education. My deeper hope in doing so is to start a conversation on changing this sad state of affairs and to get you on your way to a happy and healthy life. Isn't that what commencements are all about? Whenever I speak with my students I teach at the University of Virginia, they seem deeply pessimistic about the state of the world. We all know the reasons. Climate change is going to kill us all. Late-stage capitalism is running amok. Inequality is at an all-time high. Racism and bigotry are rampant. Gender nonconforming and queer people are under unprecedented attack. Economic anxiety has never been worse. AI is coming for our jobs, and on and on and on. And a quick interjection here, whether or not you, the listener, personally believe everything in that list, just keep listening. Continuing with the speech. I then pose a simple thought experiment to them. If you were given a time machine that could take you back to any period in the last 12,000 years, since the dawn of civilization, when would you rather live? You see, I believe we currently live in the golden age of humanity. Things have never been better for human beings, yet it seems we have never felt worse about our prospects. If you're a woman, go back more than about 100 years ago, and you become property of your father and later your husband, with no voting rights and little protection under the law. If you're a person with above-average melanin levels like me, the same and worse happens to you. Gender nonconforming minorities would find the past just as terrible. Based on every objective measure of well-being, safety, health, wealth, if you are a college student in America today, you are better off and wealthier than the King of England was 300 years ago. You have better access to education, entertainment, leisure, and healthcare. You have cleaner water and more abundant food. You have a significantly safer and longer life. And you have access to all the world's knowledge, including this piece, in the palm of your hand. And it's not just you. Throughout recorded history, the vast majority of humans lived in what we would today define as abject, dehumanizing poverty. Income and wealth inequality were immeasurably worse than they are today by orders of magnitude. Women died during childbirth at staggering rates. Most humans didn't survive childhood. And various forms of subjugation and slavery were the norm in nearly all societies. On these and a variety of other objective metrics, humanity has made breathtaking progress in the past 300 years. Which then raises the question, why? Why is it that everything is amazing and nobody is happy? Well, let's get back to comparing you with the King of England. If you're anything like my students, I've tried that line with them too, you felt that something was off with that statement. How can it be that you're better off than the King of England? You certainly don't feel better off, do you? We economists call this phenomenon relative wealth concerns, or keeping up with the Joneses. These are just fancy terms to describe a simple psychological fact that we are constantly busy comparing ourselves to our peer group and feel bad when we fall short in that comparison. Peer group is an essential item in the previous sentence. No one cares that they're enormously better off than their grandparents. They just care that they're worse off than Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. You don't feel wealthy despite the fact the median human lives on the equivalent of $5,000 per year. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine if you lived in the U.S. but spent only $5,000 a year and current U.S. prices, and you've imagined the life of the median human today. Your peer group is not humanity. It's social media influencers and billionaires, and you are deeply unsatisfied when comparing your lives to theirs. You live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, yet you feel economic anxiety. The late Charlie Munger summarized it succinctly when he said, quote, "The world is not driven by greed, it is driven by envy." And in this era of instantaneous communication, networks, and social media, envy has been put into hyperdrive. But envy has also been transformed and rebranded. Once a deadly sin, it becomes a virtue. We call it fairness, or sometimes equity, now, and concentrate our attention on all the ways the world is unfair. Mostly the ways that lead to others in our peer group having more than us. And to pause reading the speech here for a moment, in Satanism we do recognize the 7 deadly sins as good things, and that is Satanic Statement number 8. Envy is good for us as Satanists because it can drive us to do more. We see other people who have things that we don't want, and we think, hey, I want to have one of those things for myself, too. Or, hey, that musician can play that thing amazingly, or that person can dress that well. Well, this makes me want to step up my game and do that to be the best I can be. Now, on the other hand, when you say, wow, that's a great thing you have, and I resent you for that, then there's nothing satanic about that. I would call that jealousy, not envy. But anyway, let's get back to the speech. The world is unfair, deeply so. It's just that you're the lucky ones. You won the birth lottery. In a truly fair world, any dollar you make or spend above $5,000 a year would instead be given to someone else. Maybe a poor Kenyan or Bangladeshi or Indian. But that's not the kind of fairness and equity anyone talking about fairness and equity around you seeks. You've been lied to. You have been told by the media, social networks, and not least your professors that this fantastic world we live in is evil. Not only that, you've been told it's your fault. You're too racist, too greedy, too white, too privileged, not sufficiently attuned to the plight of the marginalized. It is not enough to be non-racist, they say. You must be anti-racist. Anything less than that, and you're complicit in evil. Some of you are better by default due to some accidents of birth. Some of you are worse. Small wonder you feel suffocated, anxious, and depressed. Any human weighed down with this responsibility and guilt would just be as down. The cognitive dissonance of being told colonialism is evil, American slavery is uniquely evil, that wealth and the markets that enable it are evil, while going to school at a top-tier U.S. institution built on Monacan land using slave labor would incapacitate anyone. The people pushing these ideas may have meant well. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but we've seen more than enough to know that the outcomes of this worldview are terrible. And yet many of your professors keep reinforcing these harmful lies. I know that from 7 years of teaching juniors at UVA about markets. My first class of the semester is titled, What is Money? As a deceptively simple question, but simple questions are the most interesting. We discuss the emergence of barley-backed money in ancient Sumer, the idea that money is memory of past services rendered, the inherent positive sum aspect of exchange in free markets, in which by definition both sides to a transaction become better off as a result. Why would they agree to it otherwise? And the mind-bending idea that when they look around them in the classroom, everything they see, except naked humans, was made by a corporation. To a first approximation, corporations produce all the things and humans consume all the things. And we're always very rude to them. That seems mighty ungrateful of us. We also discuss wealth, or the accumulation of money. As a refugee, my family's balance sheet zeroed out in my early life. The money I have today was willingly given to me in exchange for my services, which luckily appear to be in fairly high demand. I taught my students, and they gave me proof commemorating my service to them. I then, of my free will, asked Tesla for the services of a car and passed on some of that proof of service to them to commemorate their service to me. So did many others, with their own hard-earned proof of service. We are better off, Tesla is better off, its employees and suppliers are better off, and so are their employees and suppliers. When my students ask, why do Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have so much money? I answer, because we gave it to them willingly. They created highly coveted services and managed to secure a teensy fraction of the value they created for other humans. Without fail, at the end of the class, a few students tell me that the content of the course was diametrically opposed to what they had been taught so far. Prior, they had discussions about the exploitive nature of the market system and its inherent unfairness, the evil and greed of corporations, and the fight of the exploited workers against oppressive capitalists. I point out to them that these paradigms imply a zero-sum world in which wealth can only be created by taking it from others, whereas they live in the positive-sum world of markets, in which wealth is created by exchange. Markets have deposited a magic wand in their hands, which allows them to freeze moments in time, observe what is currently happening in foreign lands, and conjure loved ones for face-to-face conversation out of thin air. Kings would have given half their kingdoms for such a wand, but now anyone can have it for the low, low price of $69.99 per month, or about 5 hours of student work. This is how we got wealthy. They were told that the wealth of men like Musk and Bezos, and incidentally theirs, is ill-gotten, despite the fact it was willingly given to them by other humans. That it was somehow taken from its rightful owners, the oppressed, whomever they may at the moment be. And that this oppressor-oppressed mindset applies more widely to other realms of human interaction. Because of accidents of birth, pigmentation, and privilege, they are oppressing others. Hence they, the oppressors, must yield the floor to the oppressed, as they have already caused enough harm. My students arrive at my class steeped in zero-sum ideas, in which one person's gain must be another person's loss. And the only way to get a thing is by oppressing it from someone else. Then they are shocked to hear heretical ideas about a world in which wealth is created, not stolen, and human interaction can be win-win and make all of us immensely well off. The dissonance is severe, and they're unsure how to deal with all the shame and guilt accumulated by years of accused oppression. So to pause the reading of the speech here again, even as Satanists, we do acknowledge the overall predatory nature of humans as animals, but it doesn't mean the solution is to whine and claim oppression. That's what weak people do. So, create win-win situations for yourself. You can take something and give somebody else a benefit in return, or at least make that person feel they're getting something in return. If you can't grasp that idea, then maybe you need to learn more about lesser magic. Anyway, continuing with the speech, he closes by saying this. I hence want to close by telling you, the class of 2024, it's not your fault. You are not evil. Merely being white or black or privileged or downtrodden or well-educated or literate or wealthy or poor or healthy or sick or cisgendered or nonconforming does not make you bad, nor make you good, for that matter. The sins of your forefathers are not your own. You did nothing wrong by being born. Yes, aiming to improve the state of human affairs is noble, but choosing instead to study, play games, and make out with the cute person you have your eye on does not make you a bad person. It makes you a normal, healthy human being. And no one seems to bother to tell you that. So there, I said it. You are not subject to the original sin. Go forth and have a happy and healthy life. There is still much room for progress, but things are currently better than they've ever been, and improving fast. Or as George Carlin put it in his direct way, life gets really simple once you cut out all the bullshit they teach you in school. Oh, and one last thing. You might wonder why I'm saying such heretical things in public. It's because I'm committed to do it as part of my Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging DEIB goals for the year. All professors at UVA have a yearly review covering goals in the all-important fields of teaching and researching excellence, as well as the recently added DEIB goals. The specific DEIB question on my annual review was, outline your priorities and plans for the coming year, including your specific goals to help foster diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within the school and within your classroom. Here is what I had to say about that. Why is this category still here? I'm one of the most diverse faculty members here. I'm a refugee, I'm a veteran, I'm an immigrant, a person with an above-average melanin level, and the proud owner of the only mezuzah at McIntyre. And I aspire to include all of my students and give them a feeling they belong. Yet, possibly the thing most diverse about me is my opinion in the next point. Diversity is great, inclusion is amazing, we should all feel like we belong here, but the only interpretation of equity I've ever had rigorously defined is stock equity in a company. The main meaning of the word I could find seems to be adjacent to equality of outcomes, which I hold to be an anti-liberal and deeply misguided. My DEIB goal for 2024 is to help abolish the DEIB establishment at UVA. I think I've done that really well on my DEIB goal for the year with this piece. They'll probably give me a raise after that, don't you think? At the very least, no one will accuse me of telling you only what you want to hear. And maybe a few of you will actually heed my advice. If that's the case, it was all worth it. And that concludes the speech to the class of 2024, You Are All Diseased, by Professor Robert Parham at the University of Virginia's McIntyre School of Commerce. Delivered May 2024. And that also concludes this episode of Satansplain. Thank you for listening. Hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at Satansplain.com. And for more information on Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode is copyright 2024, Magister Bill M.